I was always amazed with how influential stories are. We might think that we're simply entertaining ourselves with them, but in fact, we're adapting them, extracting the rules from them, and trying to live up to them. Some of my favorite people are famous precisely because of their stories and the conclusions that follow from them. Others demonstrate the power of stories to influence their own lives and the lives of entire societies. For example, Jordan Peterson emphasizes in his work how stories and rules derived from them influence our individual lives, adding deeper meaning to our existence, while Martin Luther King Jr. effectively used them to change the whole society for the better. This prompts me to create an interesting graph, a diagram of influence. The horizontal axis represents individual/communal duality of behavioral influence. On the individual side, we're dealing with our beliefs, attitudes, and personality traits, while on the communal side there are social norms, cultural expectations, and peer pressure. The vertical axis represents the duality between the rule-based and story-based approaches in influencing behavior. On rule-based side, people's behavior is influenced by instructions and guidelines, while on the story-based side, the influence relies on narratives. Now let's look at the intersection of these categories. This one represents individual story. It includes our personal stories, descriptions of who we are and always have been, and also stories that we aspire to live up to. Eric Berne's life scenarios, which are stories that a person might take too close to the heart in childhood and unconsciously try to stay in line with, also fall into this category. This one is a quadrant of individual rules. It is a space for personal code of conduct, our do's and don'ts, rules that either help us override the behavior that is natural for us or emphasize some aspects of our better selves. Most often, those are our conscious attempts to edit some parts of our individual story. Now to the communal side, this one represents communal story. Once it was about elders spinning their tales around a campfire, telling how this tribe is the most important thing for everyone around. Communal stories are a part of any society and include both religious, semi-religious, and historical stories, eposes and myths, from ancient Greece with their magnificent arsenal of myths and legends, to American manifest destiny, to China's incredibly rich history and historical pride. On a more sinister note, communal stories can also take the form of nationwide propaganda or prejudices held on a societal level. Generally speaking, this is the zeitgeist, the spirit of society in the current era. Finally, this quadrant is about communal rules. It is a place of laws and regulations, the do's and don'ts on the societal level. Often, those are formalized beliefs extracted from the communal stories and given more mandatory nature. These quadrants are engaged in an intricate web of cross-influences. Let's explore it on examples of several famous people. Those two quadrants are where David Goggins puts most of his efforts. His own story, I Am a Loser, got influenced heavily by stories of unyielding characters such as Rocky Balboa. The story of Rocky is a variation of an American dream story, therefore making this connection. Through integration of this story, David Goggins created his own personal code of conduct, which is now engaged in a feedback loop with his self-story, keeping it in check, ensuring the determination and success. Jordan Peterson puts his efforts here, especially in his latest works. He studied how a communal epos about 1,000 years Reich produced by Hitler created a demand for changes in law in Germany of 1930s, and new laws swallowed people, introducing changes in personal codes of those who initially weren't even susceptible to such influence. With enough people accepting new collective narrative, new versions of epos have emerged, thus completing the feedback loop, creating more and more dreadful propaganda. And Jordan Peterson, being a very attentive researcher, understands the importance of resisting to such tides and attempts to break the cycle with his own personal code of conduct. His code is both something that we see in action in his debates and interviews, and in his books on rules for life. Martin Luther King Jr. touched all those four quadrants. His own story, personally held beliefs were formulated in the personal code, such as judge a man not by the color of his skin, but by the contents of his character, which in turn changed the communal story of American society, targeting the racial prejudice and segregation. At the same time, due to his unyielding character and willingness to put in as much effort as necessary, he achieved changes in the law, the most famous of which is the Civil Rights Act. Andrew Tate, in the most thoughtful content of his, touches those quadrants. He points out to the societal messages that shame some forms of masculinity. Affected individuals are forced to an inner conflict between those messages and their desire for competence and strength, which results in a personal code of conduct that regulates their behavior, reducing their allegedly toxic traits. Those codes of conduct inevitably spill back into social messages, completing the feedback loop and ensuring doubling down on such propaganda. Andrew Tate's recipe for averting it is to build a strong character, which would negate such societal influences. These people showed, with their examples, researches, and observations, how interconnected are the behavioral influences. Naturally, personal rules and stories are engaged in a loop of self-adjustment, guiding our behavior. But they are also subjects of outer influence as well. Our stories are heavily influenced by stories that are prevalent in the community that we are part of. Our personal rules are subject of laws, social norms, communal rules. Communal stories are essentially the zeitgeist, the spirit of our society in the current epoch, and naturally they influence our communal rules, such as laws. But law also has to account for the behavior of individuals. Those people who have the spine that is embedded in their personal stories, that is their second nature, are the only people who really can change the law. And finally, the individual rules have influence over our communal stories. As Jordan Peterson notes, propaganda can thrive only when everyone is willing to lie, but it inevitably fails when everyone is committed to the truth. Our personal stories and everything connected to them are helping us to make sense of our lives, which otherwise could be considered to be just a chain of semi-random events. It helps us navigate through the world with purpose and direction. Those stories, along with the lessons we learn from them, greatly influence our lives, both on an individual and societal levels. And this diagram shows the intricate web of influence between stories and rules that guide our lives. I just couldn't resist an attempt to make a visualization like that. As usual, I do not claim anything here to be an absolute truth, as I simply share my thoughts and observations. What do you think about it?